When I returned to Toronto, I told my friends and colleagues at the CBC that I was planning on moving to Los Angeles. I didn't know when, but I knew it was definitely in my future. But the months rolled on and I continued working on the various TV variety shows, panel games and talk show. Then I tore a calf muscle playing tennis, so I was literally knocked off my feet for a few weeks. It's interesting how big plans can often take a while to materialise. Doubts can creep in, fear and insecurities surface. Will I be doing the right thing? Change really is the only constant in life and necessary for our growth, yet we often resist it. After all, it is the unknown, and for me to move to Los Angeles on my own was a big step. I was at another crossroads. So I did what a lot of people do when they're not sure of their future. They take themselves off to a psychic. In my case, a tea leaf reader. The reader's shingle hung from a small doorway at the north end of Yonge Street in Toronto. It read, "Tea leaves read here." Not exactly a very enticing sign, but it was definitely straightforward. And I was assured by a friend that this reader of my favourite brew was the real deal. A slightly built and assuming woman came to the door and, as was expected, sat me down and gave me a cup of tea without milk, which was not how I liked it. However, I knocked it back, swallowing a couple of leaves in the process, which could easily have changed the whole course of my life. Then the reader took the cup and looked intently at the remaining leaves. She saw travel in my future. Very predictable, I thought. Then, when she saw palm trees and an American flag, I paid attention. As I stared at a faint resemblance of palm trees and stars and stripes in the flowered china teacup, I knew this was the sign I needed to propel me forward. After a wonderful going-away party, I packed up my job and my apartment, filled my car to the brim, and made my way to Los Angeles via Detroit. I told the very efficient immigration officer that I was only heading to the States for a 6-week extended holiday. But one look at the many boxes in my car gave her reason to believe I was intending to move to the US. Because I didn't have the necessary visa, alarm bells were ringing for her. So she turned me away and said I would need to go back to Toronto and get a letter from my employer to say that I would be returning to work in 6 weeks. This was the first major obstacle. The second was falling asleep at the wheel in the fast lane on a 3-lane highway while making my way back to Toronto. I hadn't slept much the night before because I was so excited and a little anxious about driving all the way to California. Now, with the 4-hour return trip ahead of me, I was deflated, had lost my initial rush of adrenaline, and I was very tired. So I felt it was wise to stop at a coffee shop to get a little caffeine. I was sure that would do the trick, but it didn't. I woke up as I was just about to crash head-on into a huge 24-wheeler vehicle. I frantically moved over into the second lane, collided with a large Cadillac, and we both went flying in the air over the, fortunately, empty outside lane. I landed in a muddy ditch, and the Cadillac crashed through a fence into a field. I wasn't injured, and I prayed that the people in the Cadillac were unhurt too. When I saw a middle-aged man and woman emerging from the car, seemingly unscathed, I knew my prayers had been answered. The woman said, "What did you do? Fall asleep at the wheel or something?" I must have," I told her. Soon the police had arrived along with an ambulance, which, thank goodness, wasn't needed. When the police asked what happened, I figured it probably wasn't a good idea to say that I'd fallen asleep at the wheel. So I said, I don't know what happened. I think there must be something wrong with my wheels because they just veered to the right. I lost control. The two police officers looked at me rather suspiciously. "You'd better come back with us to the police station." Oh dear, what was next? The police station was in London, Ontario, halfway to Toronto, and the police officers were all very kind. They sat me down and gave me a cup of hot, sweet tea, since they could see I was in shock. They also said that I was lucky and that the accident could have been so much worse. Lives could have been lost, and the man and woman in the Cadillac could have been seriously injured. I really think my guardian angel was at work again. I gave the police a statement, leaving out the fact that I'd actually fallen asleep at the wheel. They decided to charge me with making an incorrect lane change, which was certainly a lot better than dangerous driving. So I was indeed lucky. A friend drove from Toronto to pick me up, and my car was towed away. Right off for shore," the tow driver said. I loved my little blue Mazda hatchback and somehow knew that it would be okay. But what about my plans to move to Los Angeles? Surely this accident was a sign, an omen that I wasn't meant to go. This is what my friends and John Hirsch told me, but I simply didn't believe it. I did and do believe that everything happens for a reason. There were lessons to be learned here. And what were they? First, it was risky for me to drive to Los Angeles alone, and I needed a co-driver, preferably a male. Actually, a young man was originally going to accompany me, but he let me down at the last minute. Because I was determined to get to California, I decided to drive on my own, which was a mistake. It probably wasn't a good idea to pack my car with so many boxes either, especially for a 6-week holiday. I did say that I was delivering them to a friend in LA, but the immigration officer wasn't buying my story, so I sent a lot by mail. While I waited to hear if my car was going to be okay, I visualized it whole and complete and just like new. I also saw myself driving to California in my Mazda, and that's exactly what I was doing 3 weeks later. I was armed with a necessary letter required by US Immigration, which I typed on John Hirsch's company letterhead, Flugel Productions, stating that I would be returning in 6 weeks' time, and John signed it. My next attempt at entering the States was via Buffalo, and this time around I had a co-pilot by the name of Sheldon, a shy, sweet, handsome, 19-year-old young man who lived at home with his parents. I had their phone number, so if along the way Sheldon proved to be not quite as sweet and there was hanky-panky, I'd be able to give them a call. He actually seemed very young for his age and failed to tell me he couldn't drive a stick shift, so it was a bit hairy at times. However, we got along okay, although he wasn't very chatty. I was very surprised when he said he wanted me to drop him off in Las Vegas, Sin City. So it seems there was a different side to him after all. Before we even crossed the border into the States, though, I had to face an immigration officer again. I was very tense as I handed over my passport and the letter stating I would be returning in 6 weeks. I told the officer that we were going to Florida, which was on the opposite coast to LA. Then he said, "Have you ever been turned away at the border before?" Of course I had to say yes. And that's when the fun began. It seems that my name was in the system, so I was given the 3rd degree. Every piece of my luggage was taken apart, as if I was a drug dealer, and he found what he called incriminating material, a letter from my mother with the words, "I know you've always wanted to go to Hollywood," included. That was the nail in the coffin. I told him I wasn't going there anymore, and he insisted on knowing why. So I had to concoct a story. Oh, it goes on and on. It was grueling, and I was treated like a criminal. There's so much more to this story, which I've described in my book. But because I'm sure you're probably keen for me to get to Los Angeles, I'll move on. I will tell you, though, that I was allowed to cross the border with a stern warning that I'd better return in 6 weeks and they'd be looking for me. I was literally shaking in my shoes, while Sheldon, who I'd failed to inform of my previous problem crossing the border, didn't quite understand why the immigration officers had given me such a hard time. All I would say is that when you're determined to take a certain path in life, obstacles will appear, but don't be deterred from your mission, your passion and your fate. Opportunities will present themselves. This you must believe. However, sometimes you just have to wait a little while for everything to fall into place. Timing is everything. Next time, my first job at the Samuel Goldwyn Company. Thanks for listening.